Okay, we're going to have words on the screen tonight for our song, but in case it's 618, 618, stand up for Jesus. Stand up for Jesus. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead, till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. Stand up for Jesus, the trumpet call obey. For to the mighty conflict in this his glorious day. Ye that are his now serve him against unnumbered foes. Let courage rise with danger, and strength to strength oppose. Stand up for Jesus, stand in his strength alone. The arm of flesh will fail you, ye dare not trust your own. Put on the gospel armor, and watching unto prayer, where duty calls or danger, be never wanting there. Thank you. Sounded good.
And we found out there are a lot of people that are watching this online. It's just, I've learned so much. Are you guys? It's just awesome. So, want to introduce my good friend Scotty again. I never get tired of this. Just so many years we got to work together with Pathfinders and different things. He's just a very good friend. L.S. Baker Jr. is the Associate Director of Andrews University Press, where he serves as managing editor of the Andrews Study Bible, both New King James Version and the NIV, and the newly released Andrews Commentary, both Old Testament and New Testament volumes. Dr. Baker is an Egyptian archaeologist at Karnak Temple in Egypt, where he reads and translates hieroglyphs. He's the co-host of Inside the Bible on the Hope Channel, and is active in his local church and community through his church's Pathfinder Club, and much, much more. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Archaeology Exodus. I am Dr. L.S. Baker Jr. and friend of Dan, who just was up here. And welcome to everybody who's watching online. Apparently there's quite a few people. I actually heard that there's people in Belgium, Germany, Austria, and Ireland, and many other countries that are watching this. So thank you for watching and for being with us, and for everybody who's here tonight. Tonight we get a chance to talk about the Golden Horse, who was Pharaoh of the Exodus. And before we start, I'd like to start with a quote. The quote comes from Arthur Weigel. He's an archaeologist. He wrote about his experience going into tombs. He said, "It would be hopeless to attempt to put into writing those impressions which go to make the entering a great Egyptian sepulchre so thrilling. One cannot describe the silence, the echoing steps, the dark shadows, the hot, breathless air, nor tell of the sense of vast time and the penetrating of it, which stirs one so deeply." And I can testify that it is true. Even today, as you go, if anybody here who's been to Egypt and you've been into the tombs or the pyramids, you know there is something different about going in them. Even with all the tourists around who are doing the same thing you're doing, it's quite thrilling. Tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about tombs as we talk about who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. If you want to stay in contact with me, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can email me at Andrews. It's LS Baker Jr. for everything. I have some Instagram pictures if you want to follow Instagram pictures, some things on Facebook. I don't do a lot with Facebook anymore. But Flickr, I do have quite a few things on Flickr, including some walkthroughs. So if you're interested in contacting me, you can always email me and ask me a question. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you I don't know the answer. But I'll try my best to help you know how to find maybe an answer as best I can. Also, I mentioned last night, I'm also, in addition to being the Associate Director of Andrews University Press, I'm also an adjunct professor in the seminary. And we just got back from the General Conference session in St. Louis, where there was a great sale of a lot of books, Andrews University Press books, including the Andrews Bible Commentary that Dan just mentioned. It's actually usually $140. It's actually only $100 until July 31. And so if you've ever been looking for a nice, concise Bible commentary in just 2 small volumes, written as articles, like the articles written for the Adventist Review, very easy to read articles hitting the main points of every passage in the Bible, then this is the Bible. This is one for you. I actually have had people write to us and tell us that they've read the commentary cover to cover. I never thought anybody would read a commentary cover to cover, but apparently it's very easy to read and they enjoy it. So that was impressive for me. It's universitypress.andrews.edu, and it's good for a couple more days. I just wanted you to know about that. All right, a few days ago, 2 days ago, we talked about when the Hebrews were in Egypt, when they left Egypt, and we landed on, no matter what the theory is, everybody who agrees that the Exodus happened or was meant to happen, as the Bible describes, puts it in the New Kingdom, either the 18th or 19th. The New Kingdom also includes the 20th dynasty. And then we also had different theories about when they came, how long they stayed, and I told you that I'm in the middle section there. We also talked last night about where they may have lived in Egypt, and we showed that there was 3 capitals, either in the Middle Kingdom, which is that purple dot there at Lisht. That'll be the Middle Kingdom theory, that they came in the Middle Kingdom. And then during the Second Intermediate period, there was 2 capitals, because there was a time of chaos where multiple kings were ruling at the same time. And we mentioned last night that this northern capital, which was where the Hyksos were located during that famous war, the Great Hyksos War, that this is where likely the city of Ramses is mentioned from Exodus 1:11, and that Pithom is right next to it in this Wadi Tumilat that's just right over here. So this section right here is the section we're talking about. So if you need a bigger map, this is a good map to refer back to. We'll be referring probably mostly just localized kind of delta map here, which shows city of Ramses there, the city of Pithom, P-Atam, Pithom, and P-Ramses, the city of Ramses there. So these are likely 2 places, which means Goshen is probably right here, the land of Ramses itself, where they left from. The pyramids of Giza over here, just for reference. All right. So tonight, to start off, let me tell you a little bit about the Valley of the Kings. I love the Valley of the Kings. It's just across the river from where I work in Luxor. I work on this side of the bank in the Karnak Temple. On the other side, the west side, is the Valley of the Kings. Actually, here's the river right here, and the fertile lands on either side of it. And on the west bank, up in the cliffs, the Valley of the Kings is right there. I don't expect you to read this map at all, but here's a picture of what it looks like, the Valley of the Kings. But it actually has little spurs going off. It's a wadi where, rain comes down. And every time you see a little black dot, you probably can't read it from where you're sitting or anything, but every time you see a little black dot, those are actually tombs that have been found. The first 10 tombs were numbered as you come into the valley. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is there, 6, 7, 8, and you kind of go through all the way through 10 as you come in, because those were open already when the earliest Egyptian archaeologists went there. And then as they discovered tombs after that, they started numbering them in the order that they discovered them. So the order after that is kind of chaotic as it goes all over the place. By the way, the Valley of the Kings is the burial place for all the kings of the New Kingdom, the time of the Exodus that we're talking about. So the Pharaoh of the Exodus likely has a tomb in this, whoever the Pharaoh is, has a tomb here. My favorite tomb actually is this tomb here. It's KV5. It's the largest tomb. It's located right at the beginning. It was one that was known forever, but actually only a small part of it was known for antiquity. An American archaeologist, Egyptian archaeologist named Kent Weeks was part of the Theban mapping project. He realized that these tombs are all three-dimensional. They're carved into the stone itself at different angles, and he wanted to know if there's a way to map it out. Because if you can map it out in three-dimensional space, maybe you can find gaps where there likely could be maybe another tomb. And so it kind of gives you that. And also, it's good for science to kind of have everything kind of mapped out. And so using, very accurate GPS and lasers and grand penetrating radar and all kinds of things, photogrammetry and whatever, he started mapping out all these tombs. And he kind of went through the whole valley. There's quite a few of them, 60 some of them. And he left KV5 for last. The reason why he did is that periodically in the valley, it doesn't rain often in Egypt. But when it does rain, because the ground can't absorb all the water, there's flash floods, right? And so the water will come into the Valley of the Kings and wash all this debris kind of through the valley. And if there's any open tombs, it goes right in. Well, KV5 was one of those that have been open since antiquities. So when it got robbed out, it never got closed. They knew exactly where it was at. And so it was filled with all of this rubble that was almost like concrete. And he really didn't have the heart to dig it out, so he kind of left it for last. And so what he ended up doing is, when it came time to do it, he actually came in. Here's the red arrow is where I'm standing. This is the entrance right here. And he went down inside of it, did all the imaging of the three-dimensional space, recording of it, the next room, and then this big pillared hall was just filled almost to the ceiling with this concrete. And so they dug around the sides to try to get the length of it, kind of the breadth of it or whatever, to kind of keep it from collapsing, of course, as well. And in the process of doing that, they discovered some things. They discovered that in the back, so here's this main room right here. In the back, there's a little stairs going down, and there's a hallway. They opened up the hall, they opened this door, and it was a long hallway going all the way back with doors on each side, all the way back. And so they went all the way back in all these doors. When they got to the back, I'll go through this one here. They got all the way to the back. They got to the back two doors, and they weren't doors to rooms, doors to other hallways with more rooms. Can you imagine how thrilling this is? And then they got back to that main pillared hall, and they went down, which is down here, more rooms. Got to the bottom, and it keeps going, same thing over here, and it keeps going and going and going, and they still today have not finished excavating and mapping KV5. It just keeps going. Turns out this is where Ramses the Great had all of his sons buried. He lived a very long time, and he outlived the first 12 of his sons, but he had lots and lots of them, and he wanted them all to have the afterlife, so he actually had a tomb built for them, and this is what that tomb was. Unfortunately, most of the rooms are fairly empty. Every once in a while there's something in it, but nothing spectacular or nothing that glitters, I think, as we usually look for. Anyway, that's KV5, and then right across the valley, a little ways up, is the most famous tomb, which is probably one of the smallest ones as well, and that's KV62, Tutankhamun's. I'm going to go over here. Tutankhamun's is one of the smallest tombs. It also goes down, but then it just has only a few rooms in it. This right here is just a holding area that actually is set up over here on the top part of it. The tomb is actually, entrance is down a little ways. When you get down into it, I think I have a video where you can kind of walk down. You actually go down quite quickly, and before you know it, you're actually in the outer annex area of the room where this was chock full of furnishings and things when Howard Carter found it. The room we just walked through, that tunnel we just walked through, was filled with debris. It was actually, when Carter found it, they had to dig it out, and they found that it had been robbed twice, but not completely, obviously. Here's Tutankhamun. He's still actually there. Right next to his feet, over here down below, is another room that was filled with things. We turn to the right. We're coming to this one where all these people are at. Actually, some of these are my students. They're in the way. But there used to be a wall there, and then that wall's been taken out, and that's where Tutankhamun was found. But this whole room that you're looking at right now was just filled with a canopy, golden canopy, like a nesting dolls, all the way down into this. I'll show you what that looks like. By the way, if you want to walk through with some of the old pictures, you can follow that QR code up there. Small little tomb. But here's the nesting. He had a wall. So here you see the wall right here with the two statues of Tutankhamun kind of guarding it. Actually, this wall, if you see pictures, I should have put a picture here. I don't have one. I'll go back one. If you see pictures of this when Howard Carter went there, it's black and white, but you'll see these same two statues. In my walkthrough, you'll see it, but you can go online and find it as well. Right at the base of this wall where this door is now, there wasn't a door, it was a complete wall. You'll see a basket, kind of a reed basket kind of leaning up against the wall. Well, that was put there by Howard Carter because what happened is they illegally cut a hole apparently in this wall, snuck in because they didn't they couldn't bear thinking of going in there, and Tutankhamun was not in there. So they apparently dug a hole. They went in. They came into this room here, and they had all this wall of gold right in front of them, which was the outer shrine. Inside that shrine is a canopy. That's number 2 there, a canopy, shroud. Inside the canopy was another shrine, then another shrine, and then the sarcophagus you see. And inside the sarcophagus was a number of here's the shrines here, is the sarcophagus, and a number of coffins going down until you get to the famous death mask and then Tutankhamun himself. Here's all the different layers that they had to eventually get through. But they went in there, they opened up the outer one, they realized the seal, the ropes that had tied it closed was sealed, so no one had been in, so they left it and they went back out and kind of hide their sin, so to speak. They put a reed basket there. But what does the Bible say? Make sure your sins will find you out. And so they were discovered doing that illegal. But anyway, it all turned out well for everybody in the end. But that's what they found. Well, this tomb has been in the news last maybe decade now because there's a big question about, is there anything else to this tomb? The reason why they wondered this is because this is an 18th dynasty tomb. 18th dynasty tombs characteristically go downstairs. You come down. 19th to 20th dynasty tombs don't have these stairs. You just basically go down along ramp. And they're very, very straight. But 18th dynasty tombs come down and they turn. And usually if it's a king, it will turn to the left. But Tutankhamun's goes down and turns to the right, which typically happens for female tombs. Well, Tutankhamun is not a female, so what's going on? And so there's theories that maybe this tomb was meant for his mother. Maybe it was meant for Nefertiti. Maybe Smenkhare, who may have been Nefertiti. And so because of the large number of tourists that come in, you look at kind of the smudges here. These aren't smudges. This is actually a mold, a black mold. And for the longest time, even to just recent years, the Antiquities Department in Egypt thought this was because of all the tourists that come in. That's molding. Well, we can't lose that artwork is irreplaceable. We can't lose it. And so the idea was, let's use photogrammetry, same kind of thing we're using in Karnak Temple, photogrammetry to measure accurately with lasers and everything the exact positions of everything on the wall and recreate a new tomb, a replica tomb of Tutankhamun out by Howard Carter's house, which is near the entrance to the Valley of the Kings. It's still there today. And they've actually done that, by the way. I haven't been there yet, but they've actually done that. Come to find out that this mold actually is not from tourists. We just recently have discovered this mold actually is old. It turns out that this painting here, this gold painting you see, was actually put on, and the tomb was sealed so that it was still wet when it was sealed, and that's where the mold came from. There's another piece up above. It's hard for me to describe it, but where that wall was, where the two statues were, on the inside looking back, that was put up last, and apparently that was painted, and while they moved in all the furnishings for Tutankhamun, it had time to dry, and it had no mold. So they discovered the mold is actually old, and it's actually underneath that paint. So there's something else happened there, and they don't know exactly what happened, but it goes to the theory. So they did this, but the nice thing about doing this with computers is you can then remove the painting. So all you have is the wall behind it. And Nicholas Reeve, a very Egyptologist who works in the Valley of the Kings, looked at this and he said, I think there's a door here and there may be another door right here. Can you see them? Can you see them? So he says, I think there's a door right here and I think there's a door over here. And so he said, we can't punch through the wall. I mean, the whole point of saving this with building a replica so we don't destroy this. So is there a way we can measure this? And so they brought in ground-penetrating radar, and they tested it. They tested it 3 times. The first test said, yes, there is a void behind there. There is actually an emptiness. So maybe it actually continues on. If that's the case, that means whatever is behind that wall has not been seen since Tutankhamun was buried. It has not been robbed. It is still there. And if it's Nefertiti, imagine what's inside there. And so that it's possible that there could be something there. Maybe another one over the other wall as well. But then they did test it again, and the second test said, nope, no void at all. Okay, that's disappointing. Well, they weren't satisfied, so they went to the top, I understand, on the surface, and they measured it going down. Otherwise, they were measuring it going at an angle, which isn't the way ground-penetrating radar usually works. So they did it going down, and that one said, yeah, maybe there is a void. So it's inconclusive. So we don't know if there's anything there or not. Maybe someday they'll use a fiber optic cable or whatever, and drill in maybe through this room here and come through this wall, which is not decorated, which would be into that hallway there from this room. Maybe they can do that and discover if anything actually is there or not. But if they do, they need to be able to capture the air, because all the pollen and everything else that is in that air is from that ancient times. And all that is scientific data. So we'll see whatever happens from there. Anyway, this is the Valley of the Kings. Well, most of the kings are not in their tombs. Most of the kings were buried someplace, or were reburied, saved and reburied someplace else in what they call royal caches. One of them is on the other side. So the Valley of the Kings is actually right here. And then on this side, on our side of the picture, is Deir el-Bahari. This is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. She's the one in 18th dynasty who was a queen who became actually a king. Talk about her in a little bit more in a minute. Up on this ridge over here, there's actually a shaft that goes down. Here's the shaft. It goes down, and there's actually, it goes inside, and there's actually a hallway that was lined with all these mummies that had been reburied there in a royal cache. This picture here is of the Abu Rasul brothers, who actually were robbing it and trying to sell its antiquities. They were caught, and I think they were tortured by the Egyptian police at that time, and then they were forced to show where this was at, and so that's how we ended up with all the mummies, and so now we have most of the mummies. The second royal cache is actually in the valley itself. It's back up over here, KV 35. That's the tomb of second Amenhotep. If you remember last night, we mentioned the first Amenhotep is the one who had mass slavery, so almost certainly was the one who put the Hebrews into slavery. The second king by the name Amenhotep is the one who abandoned the northern capital for a short time. I mentioned that last night. In his tomb, by the way, he also was found in his tomb. The only other pharaoh to be found in his tomb was Amenhotep, the second one. And he also had a tomb that was a royal cache. Not as many, but there's a room there with a number of different kings, including Merenptah, the son of Ramses the Great. He was reburied there. That's the wall we're working at in Karnak. And then his son, Thutmose IV, Amenhotep III, his grandson, Amenhotep's grandson. Also, there was a boy. This is a boy with a side lock. He also was buried there. He died apparently young. He was hacked by an axe by a grave robber at some point. So this is not how he died, but this is after he was already buried. They hacked at his mummy to get the amulets and things out. So this boy was also buried in this tomb with Amenhotep. I don't expect you to read this up on the screen, but if you see the blue, these are all the kings that were buried in Deir el-Bahari. So you can see most of them, the Hatshepsut cache, that's the blue ones. The green ones are the ones that were buried in Amenhotep's tomb. And so most of the kings of the New Kingdom, their mummies were buried either in one cache or the other. And so we have most of them. Still a few missing, but we have most of them. So up on the screen here, I have a list of all the kings of the New Kingdom. Since the Exodus took place in the New Kingdom, somewhere on that screen is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. I think we can do better, though, than that. The blue one is Hatshepsut, and the green one is Amenhotep, the two royal caches, just so you know, just so you kind of can follow along. And here's Amenhotep I here. Here's Ramses the Great here, and here's Merenptah. We just mentioned him a minute ago. So this kind of orient yourself a little bit. So this is, during the Exodus, one of these guys was king. I want to tell you a little bit about the kings. It's not as easy. You notice that there's already one named Amenhotep. Second one has the royal cache. There's also two more named Amenhotep. The fourth one is Akhenaten. He's the heretic king that rebuilt a new capital at Amarna and had just the one god Aten. There's also four kings by the name Thutmose. Thutmose 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's two Setis. And then there's 11 Ramses. Apparently in the 20th dynasty, they got to Ramses and just kind of ran out of names and said, okay, I guess everybody's going to be Ramses now. So they just kind of Ramses the rest of the way. But the Ramses that we're concerned with usually is the second one there, Ramses the Great. There actually were 5 names, 5 royal names. Every king had, at some point in history, had 5 royal names. They had the Horus name, which is the oldest name. It has a Horus with a Serach there. Then there's the Nebti name. This is the Nekbet and Wajet, the two protectress goddesses from Upper and Lower Egypt. Remember we mentioned that last night, the vulture and the cobra, the two ladies' named. And then they have the Golden Horus. This presentation tonight is named Golden Horus, and I'll tell you why that's important later tonight. And then the Prenomen. This is the The Nesut Biti, I mentioned that last night as well. That's the prenomen, or the throne name. So that name is a unique name. The Nomen is the names you just saw. That's the birth name. They were born Amenhotep, Tutmos, Ramses. Those are the birth names that were given. And so there was a lot of other, by the way, a lot of other princes by the name Ramses or Amenhotep or Tutmos or whatever that never rose to become king, just a birth name, very popular birth name. So here's the white. In the white is the birth names, the nomens that I just introduced you to. Here's all of the throne names, and they're very, very unique. I'll show you. For example, the first, second Tutmos and the second Amenhotep have very similar throne names. Aa-Keper Kare, Aa-Keper Enre, Aa-Keper Ure. Just a very simple letter difference. It means something different. This is great is the beings of the Ka. It's the life force of Ra. This name means great are the beings of, and is of Ra. And then Amenhotep's throne name is great are the beings of Ra. So this is the S, the plural, the U. I mentioned that last night. The third Tutmos and fourth Tutmos also have very similar names. Menkeperre and Menkeper-U is the plural again. Menkeper-U-Re. So very, very similar. So when you're memorizing these names, if you ever care to memorize them, you have to be very, very intentional to memorize the details. By the way, the third Tutmos, the father of Amenhotep, we mentioned a couple of times already, he was the first pharaoh who applied the term pharaoh to himself. Before him, Pharaoh applied to everybody in the royal family. It was like the great house, or the great family, a dynasty. Everybody's Pharaoh. And so he by the time he became king, he said, no, not anybody's Pharaoh, just me. And maybe one of the reasons why, it could be many reasons why, one of the reasons might have been Hatshepsut. Tutmos was the son of the second Tutmos, but his mother was not Hatshepsut. His mother was a lesser queen named Isis, Iset. And so when he was a stepson of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was actually the daughter of the first Tutmos, the sister, sister of the second Tutmos, but she did not have a son. She just had a daughter named Neferure. And so when her brother died, little Tutmos was too young to rule, the eldest son, but he was only 7 at the time. And so as it happened 4 other times up to that point in the 18th dynasty, it was very common. The mother stepped in, Hatshepsut stepped in, and ruled for a time. And in doing that, she decided to take one more step and just become a king. And so she became a king, and all of her figures became masculine, and all of her names became the masculine pronoun and everything. Every once in a while, you find the feminine pronoun in there. And so we think kind of what happened was when Tutmos became king, he said, no, I'm the Pharaoh, no one else is Pharaoh. And from that point on, Pharaoh moved on. It's also interesting because in the Bible, pharaohs used even back at the time of Abraham. But if Moses really was the one who wrote this, as I believe, probably most of us here and those watching probably believe, and I believe as well, then Moses had to have written that after Tutmos, which, by the way, is not controversial because everybody believes that the Exodus probably took place sometime after this. So Moses likely wrote that after Tutmos had applied that just to himself. And so actually in the Bible, it kind of helps us see this actually is a very accurate way of referring to the king himself, just as Pharaoh and not the family. Well, there's also, you might have noticed that the word Moses appears quite a lot. Moses just means, in this case, born of Thoth, the god Thoth. Moses is just a name element. And in fact, the name element just means born of. Born of. You see it quite a lot. In the New Kingdom, there's Ka-Moses, Ah-Moses, Tut-Moses, Amen-Moses, Waj-Moses, Mer-Moses, Ptah-Moses, Ra-Moses, Hapim-Moses, Min-Moses. In fact, Ra-Moses, it's spelled with an O in the 18th dynasty by modern scholars. The ancients didn't use vowels. So it's the exact same name, by the way, as Ramesses, just with the E. The E and the O are modern ways of saying 18th or 19th to 20th, but it's the exact same name in Egyptian. It just means born of a god. That's all Moses means. And of course, you recognize Moses from the Bible, because in Exodus 2:10, it says that the child grew. This is Moses. He's been given back to his mother, Jochebed. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. Now, it's interesting because in Hebrew, Moses it's not the Hebrew. That's actually a Greek version of the name. The Hebrew version is Moshe. And in fact, in Egyptian, it's actually just Mos with no S at the end. The S is a Greek version of it. But Moses is where it comes from. In Hebrew, it's a verb that means drawn out, which probably comes from this story itself. It doesn't actually what it means ahead of time. So how do we understand this? This come out. Let me tell you a little story, because I think it's kind of fun to think about this story. So if you think about Jochebed, and she has a baby boy. And at that time, the king had said, any baby boys, this is Exodus chapter, the last verse of chapter 1 and then next chapter 2, any baby boys born to the Hebrews should be thrown into the water. And so she hid him for 3 months. She hid him for 3 months because it turns out, I found this out, that a mother, even a slave mother, if you give birth to a baby, girl or boy, under normal circumstances, you're given 2 years, up to 2 years, to wean. So if you time it right, if you're a good husband, your wife never has to go to the fields and work. You just have another baby. About 9 months before the end of that 2 years, and so there's always a new baby coming. And so and that's why there was so many babies. They kept going, and obviously God put his hand. Exodus chapter 1 has 3 miraculous growths, just tremendous growths that God put his hands on them, and they didn't die. One of the sad things about archaeology is we most of our information comes from cemeteries, and many of the cemeteries in ancient Egypt have lots of babies, newborns, stillborns, under the age of 2, 3 years old that have died because infant mortality was actually quite high in Egypt. But in Exodus chapter 1, it seems like God put his hand on the Hebrews and didn't allow the babies or the mothers to die, but they just kept having babies. And so slave babies, if your wife has to never go back. But if your baby dies in infancy or in childbirth, then you have 3 months to recover, and then you go back to work. So it seems like what the Bible is saying is that they could hide him for 3 months because the mother could stay home with him. But when the 3 months are over, she has to go back to the field. So what are you going to do with a baby? You can't just leave him at home. He's going to cry. He's only 3 months old. Anybody who's had babies, I think everybody here probably knows what that's like. You know what it's like to have it. You can't just leave a baby there. So they prayed, and I think they went back to the Bible, and they read a story in Genesis about Noah building a big boat, because the word for ark is the same in both places in Hebrew. And I think what they did is they said, okay, if God could protect Noah, maybe he could save my baby. So they made this little basket. They dabbed it with pitch, and they brought it, which, by the way, was not unusual, because all the women had baskets that they would carry to the field where they worked. They would put these baskets in the Nile because the food was inside. That's how their lunch was. They put the basket in the Nile, in the reeds, so the Nile can keep the food cool during the hot day so they could have lunch there. That's what is common. But on that particular day, it seems like the family was going to go hungry because there wasn't food. There was a baby inside. And so they got there, and she put the basket a little ways away, and she put it in the reeds, the same as you would any kind of basket, and then she left to go to work and told her daughter Miriam, who was too young to work, to keep an eye and see what happens. Anybody here knows what's going to happen? A baby's going to wake up, and it's going to cry, it's going to move around, it's going to fall out, an animal, crocodile, someone's going to find it. But perhaps they had heard that a princess was coming down to the water to bathe every day. By the way, princesses don't bathe in rivers. They bathe in pools of the palace. So when it says bathe, it's talking about a ritual bath. We call it ablution. She was going down for a ritual bath. So whenever a woman could not have a son, they cared about having sons because that was their legacy. You couldn't have a son in ancient Egypt, no matter if you were a princess or a commoner. You would come down to the Nile early in the morning, and you'd wade down into the Nile, and they lift up their skirts, and they dip themselves into the Nile, hoping that the Nile god Happy would give them a child from the gods. And that's what apparently the princess was doing. And so it seems like that Jochebed and Amram found out about this, and she hit her basket close to where that was happening, but not exactly where it was happening, to see what God was going to do. If God's going to direct the princess there, she'll find the baby, and then who knows what's going to happen. If not, the baby's probably going to die, because what else can we do? We can't take him home. So at some point, what's going to happen? So Miriam sat there, and you know the story. The princess came down, she bathed in the water, and then she decided to take a walk. And she walked near the river, and she saw the basket, and the rest is history. She realized it was a Hebrew baby because she gave Jochebed the job of raising her. The Egyptians believed that the wet nurse, by the way, the mothers in noble and royal society rarely nursed their own children. They had wet nurses hired, but the wet nurse had to be the same ethnicity as the child. That's why she had to get a Hebrew mother to do it. And so Jochebed was the one hired, and praise God, because that was the actual mother. So she got a chance to raise her boy for about 12 years, according to Ellen White, which I think is probably about right, even according to history. So this is what I see as happening, that when Moses came back at age 12, the princess said, he's going to be a Moses. He's a gift from the gods. And then she gave him a name, probably an Egyptian god name, like Ka Moses, Ra Moses, Tut Moses, something like that, with the Moses. But when Moses wrote that, he didn't keep that name. In fact, I think Moses didn't keep that name because of what it says in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 says that Moses, when he came of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing the affliction with his people, the people of God, rather than the passing pleasures of sins and the treasures of Egypt. And anybody who knows anything about these tombs, and Tutankhamun's tomb, you know what the treasures in Egypt involved. And so I think Moses dropped that name. I think when he killed the Egyptian and he wrote the book of Genesis and later the book of Exodus, he decided to leave that God's name off, and he became just born of nothing. He felt like he was a failure for many, many years. Last Sabbath morning, we talked about that a little bit in the sermon. You know what would be really easy for us? Why didn't God just have Moses write the name of Pharaoh? This would be a lot shorter presentation if we just had the name of Pharaoh. In fact, we have names in the Bible, right? Exodus 1:15, we have two names of two midwives. The king of Egypt doesn't have a name, but the Hebrew midwives, of whom we're never going to read another thing about, we get their names, Shiphrah and Puah. Very nice. We also get other kings in Genesis. We get all kinds of kings. We get Pharaoh in Genesis, not any other, all kings of other countries, Mesopotamia, Sodom, Gomorrah, all these kings, but we get Pharaoh. We have other kings in the Bible. We have the king of Heshbon and Bashan and Moab, Assyrian kings, Babylonian kings, very famously, Persian kings, Roman emperors. We even have kings' names of Egypt in the book of Kings, Shishak and Necho. So why not mention the king of Egypt's name in the Exodus story, which is one of the most famous and important stories of redemption in the whole book of the Bible, which creation and redemption from the Exodus are the two events that are talked about over and over in the prophecies and the Psalms. Why not mention the name of the king? And I think it's because it has to do with Egyptian customs. It seems like when you mention the name of a king, of anybody really, you're recognizing that they exist. In fact, they would actually carve their names in stone. Talk about this tomorrow night a little bit more. Carve their names in stone to make it last longer, because stone's eternal, and so that their name could be eternal. They could be remembered. I think about I know the names because my grandmother kept some names. I know the names of my grandparents on both sides. I know the names of my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, and then I don't know anybody past that. If names aren't kept, people are forgotten, right? That's just the way this reality is today. I know very little about what any of those names of my ancestors ever did because their deeds are not even recorded. So I know almost nothing but names, and some of them past a certain point, I don't know anybody's name. So it's not too different today. It's the same kind of thing. In ancient Egypt, if you didn't like somebody, and we have examples of this, you would actually write their name on a piece of pottery, and then you'd smash it and break their name. That's just the way they got. That was apparently a big insult. Anyway, so I think the book, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, were written by somebody who was familiar with Egyptian customs and salvation implications. Those two midwives, by the way, they feared God, and God gave them families. It says it right there. So he included their names because they would have salvation, but the king of Egypt probably is not going to, and that's why his name is not there. I don't know why he listed the other kings' names, but you have to ask him later on when we get to heaven. Okay, so now let's see if we can figure out if the Pharaoh of the Exodus, we know the Exodus event, what date it was. Can we just match it up and figure it out? So where do we get the kings' names from? How do we know all the things we know? We actually know it from the kings' list that are on the screen right here. There's a number of them. Now we're looking for a king's list that has to be in the 18th or 19th dynasties. Can you see those? Which ones are 18th and 19th dynasties? We have a couple of them up there. That's where the Exodus takes place, 18th through 20. We're looking at 18, 19, somewhere in these dates here. And so if you look, those are the ones right there. This only goes up to Dynasty 5. This is only Dynasty 6. This only goes through 12. It's these here that include at least 18th, sometimes 19th. This one has Manetho has all of them. And so That's where we get all the names of. And how great would it be if we could just look at those names and figure out which one is which? But unfortunately, all these kings lists are not exactly accurate when it comes to how long each king ruled. In fact, it's not even close. Sometimes it's really far off. And so it's a little bit difficult to put it together. Chronologists have been doing this for a long time, and we've come up with two possible chronologies. It depends on where you see the rising of. I don't want to get too geeky, but where the rising of the Sirius star, and if you're in Memphis or if you're in Thebes, because it's so far away, and the curvature of the earth and the timing, it could be off by about 25 years because of that. So the New Kingdom in high chronology, and by the way, there's not just one high chronology. There's a couple high chronologies and a couple low chronologies. I'm just giving you the more accepted ones. Has the New Kingdom somewhere between 1575 and 1150. Remember, we're looking at something in here which would fit in there. The low chronology drops it by about 25, approximately 25 or so, almost a little bit more at the end, years, but it still fits inside. So the New Kingdom is definitely where the Exodus is meant to have taken place. And so who is Pharaoh? Well, it's easy to find who's Pharaoh because in this theory, you recognize this from the first day we were together, which sees 1 Kings 6:1 as symbolic. The reason why they see 1 Kings 6:1 as symbolic is because they believe that Ramses, because the name Ramses is the name of a city and a name of a land, the name Ramses has to be the king. And so they say Ramses the Great is that person. And so whenever he was alive is when the Exodus took place. Therefore, 1 Kings 6:1 has to be symbolic to allow that to happen. So that's easy. That's an easy understanding why that's selected. But what do we do about these two that take it literally? The number 480 years between Solomon's fourth year, we did that two presentations ago, and the Exodus event, which puts it into the early 18th dynasty. Who could possibly be the Pharaoh? So I'm going to ask you, if you can see the screen, using either high or low chronology, and if the Exodus is 1447, exactly that date, who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Topmost, the third topmost, that's the one. Who else? Is there anybody else? Yeah, so if you're looking at 1447, you would have over here, you'd have 1447 would fit there. So topmost is one. How about over here? Second Amenhotep, who, by the way, has that royal cache I was just talking about. He's an option. So we have two options. But because, so those are the two options. In this literal possibility. But because the Exodus date could be, this conservative scholars go all the way back to 1452, it actually could include the third topmost here. So we actually have those two options over here as well. So the third topmost, second Amenhotep are the two possibilities. And so it seems like these are the three main pharaohs that are possibilities for Pharaoh of the Exodus. What do we know about them? Let's see if we can introduce you to these three kings. Not the three kings from the story of Jesus, though. A little joke. Sorry about that. Okay, anyway, these three kings. Let's go over here. So the third Tutmos, second Amenhotep, second Ramses, they all have reputations for being ruthless. They all were in control of the whole country. They all were great warriors. They all were great builders. The difference is the third Tutmos campaigned for about 6 months every year and built for 6 months. He actually campaigned so much that when they first found him, he was missing his feet, I think, and so they thought he was a little bit shorter than he really was, so they thought he was like a Napoleon, and because he campaigned so much, he was known as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Probably the greatest warrior king in ancient Egypt was the third Tutmos. He was quite remarkable. This is the young boy that Hatshepsut ruled for him because he was too young for a time, and she ruled for him for a time. So that's the third Tutmos. When he became king and she stopped ruling, then he went on campaign after campaign after campaign, almost every single year for almost 20 years. Second Amenhotep, he campaigned 2 campaigns early in his reign, 7th and 9th years, and then he didn't campaign again. He didn't campaign ever again. In fact, he became a great builder, and because he ruled for 30-something years, he was known as a benevolent king, even though early on, those first 9 years, he was ruthless. He was actually quite hated and did a lot of really, really kind of bad stuff. Second Ramses, he campaigned throughout his reign, different times. He also built. besides building, he also usurped many monuments. So Ramses was the last great builder, so you see more monuments of him than anybody else. But he also would go to a monument that someone else built. He would chisel their name off and put his name on it, and so he was able to have a lot more things that he built that he didn't actually build. But he did build quite a lot, though, and he was a great king. Lived a very, very long time. Lived a very long time. Both these two are supported by the high dating, and he is supported by the low dating. So that's the difference in those dating systems. The third Thutmose is selected by his supporters because he died close to the time of the Exodus. And so if the Exodus was in 1447 or all the way back to 1452, then that's when the Exodus took place. He died in about 1452, 1450, somewhere in that area. And so the supporters are willing to move the date of 1447 and move it back just a few years so that he can die in the Red Sea. And so that's why he's selected for that. In fact, many very great conservative scholars in the Adventist world, I'll tell you about the Adventist world, Dr. Yonker, Dr. Gain, Dr. Davidson, there's quite a few, Paul Ray, I think Paul Greger as well. There's quite a few very good scholars, good archaeologists. There's many other, Constance Gain and others, that would support this over here. Michael Hossel at Southern support Thutmose III. William Shea wrote a big article years and years ago. William Shea is a big scholar in the Adventist world. He's now, unfortunately, has passed away. But he wrote a lot. He wrote this really important article with all the evidence at the time that he knew. And so he concluded that Thutmose was the one, and everybody else basically has come along after. William Shea did at some point in his life later change his mind and say that he thinks Amenhotep was the pharaoh. Nobody jumped on board with him, and so he went back, I think before he died, to supporting Thutmose. So just full disclosure. Amenhotep II could not have died in the Red Sea, and neither could Ramses the Great, because both of them lived much longer after the Exodus. So if Pharaoh died in the Red Sea, then of these candidates, it almost has to be Thutmose. But Siegfried Horn, the great Adventist, the father of Adventist archaeology, believed Amenhotep was Pharaoh of the Exodus. A lot of my colleagues at Lipscomb University and other places in the Christian world, in fact, the majority of scholars believe that Ramses was Pharaoh, and none of them believe that Pharaoh actually died in the Red Sea. They actually maybe could be evidence that he didn't. So we're going to look at some of that. For example, the third Thutmose, one of the supporters say, well, because Exodus doesn't say that Pharaoh died in the Red Sea, it just says his horses and chariots did. Whether he happened to be on one of those chariots is the question, but it doesn't say he actually died there. But Psalm 136:15 says that God overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. And so the question is, does overthrow mean that he died? Well, the problem is that same Hebrew word for overthrow, David applies that to himself and God. He says, God overthrew me. Well, that doesn't mean kill. So there is some questions about that. So we don't really know if Pharaoh died in the Red Sea or not. There's actually, I could talk about that quite a lot, actually. If you want to talk about that afterwards, we can ask more questions. But one of the problems with Thutmose is that his eldest son could not have died in the 10th plague, because his eldest son died a decade before he did. And so that decade, the 10th plague didn't last for a decade. So that's going to be a problem. The reason why Amenhotep II was the crown prince is because his older brother had died a long time earlier. So that's a problem. Amenhotep II, his supporters say, okay, maybe Pharaoh didn't die in the Red Sea. Maybe that's just something we've thought for a long time. Maybe it's something that's wrong. But what about Amenhotep? Well, chronologically, it fits because you don't have to change the date of the Exodus. It's 1447 or close to 1446, 1445. It's right there, depending on how you count the numbers and how you do the math. So you don't have to change the Bible chronology at all. And it also fits really well with history. Remember, Amenhotep abandoned the northern capital and went south early in his reign after that 9th year campaign. And then he went out. Well, if all the chariots were lost in the Red Sea, that would explain maybe why he didn't campaign anymore after that. And he went back. In fact, his 9th year campaign, he brought back over 100,000 slaves, which is completely different. Usually it's 2,000 or 3,000 slaves. Over 100,000 slaves he brought back from the Levant. And so scholars, supporters of him will say, could it be because the Hebrews had left and he needed to bring more back in? So he fits the content best, although he does not fit the Red Sea. Horse and sheep breeds changed during his reign. Chariot design changed, which maybe because chariots were all lost in the Red Sea, maybe that's why they redesigned chariots. His mummy has sores all over it, but there's a few other mummies as well that have sores, so it can't be just that. the northern capital was abandoned, and then there's that dream stele, the dream stele of his son. So the fourth Thutmose was not the crown prince. This is the son of Amenhotep II. He has this stele. So we find the Sphinx covered up in sand. They dig it out, and in between the Sphinx's paws is this stele. On this stele is an inscription by this fourth Thutmose. The fourth Thutmose says that while he was out hunting one day in the hot sun, it became really hot, so he took a nap in the shade of the Sphinx. And the god of the Sphinx, Horam-Akhet, came to him in a dream and said, if you'll dig me out of the sand, apparently the Sphinx got buried in the sand quite a lot, if you dig me out of the sand, I'll make you the king. And so this is used as evidence that maybe his older brother had died. Well, remember, Amenhotep had a prince that was buried in his tomb. Could this prince right here you're looking at be the son who died in the 10th plague? Amenhotep supporters say it's possible. Second, Ramses supporters select him because the city was named after him and also the land, which is a very good support. The city, Exodus 1:11, the city of Pithom and Ramses. But he can only be the Pharaoh of the Exodus if chronology in the Bible is not meant to be read literally, as the supporters will really admit. That numbers in the ancient world didn't mean the same thing they mean to us, and so maybe that's why those numbers are not accurate. That's what they suggest. Well, there's another problem. His son Merenptah, which is where I'm digging on that, working on that wall in Karnak, also has this stele. It was in the Cairo Museum. I think it may still be there. I don't think they moved it over yet to the gem yet. But I'm standing next to it here, and right down here at the bottom where I'm pointing is the inscription, Israel is laid waste. Israel is mentioned on here. He destroyed Ashkelon and Gezer and Yenoim, and then it says, Israel is laid waste. His seed is no more. Probably referring, Michael Hassel from Southern thinks that seed here is referring to grain, and I think he's right on that as well. And so this mentions, Merenptah says that Israel was already living in the land and already had grain that was wiped out by Merenptah, the son of Ramses. So is it possible? Is there enough time for that? Maybe there was time, but it certainly is a difficulty. I'm actually working there on this wall, Hittite treaty. I showed you that last night. Here's the Hittite treaty right here. On both sides is Merenptah's battle at Ashkelon, at Gezer, at Yenoim, and possibly these are the feet up here of Israelites being taken back captive. It's possible. No one knows for sure because that part of the wall is lost. And so maybe they're not there at all, actually. So who knows? But that's a bigger picture of the wall that I work on every time I go. I was just there a couple of months ago, actually. It was very hot. It's a bad time to be there. The best time to be in Egypt is in December. And I understand the best time to be here is also in December. Is that right? So I think your weather is very Egyptian. So you should. I don't know if that makes you happy or sad. It makes me happy. So anyway, I don't know if it makes you happy or not, but maybe. Anyway, the Berlin pedestal is another piece of evidence, but people don't really know for sure. This is an 18th dynasty inscription that may actually mention Israel already as one of the people in the Levant already. This is unfortunately, of course, it's the broken part. The broken part right here. May say Israel. It looks like it might. I think I think it definitely does say Israel. If you're asking me in epigraphy, that's how I would reconstruct it. And that's 18th dynasty, which is before Ramses the Great. But if this could also be a fake, so that's what people say. So I'm not 100% sure one way or the other. So there's a possibility that this also could refute and say that Ramses is too late, that there was no Israelites at the time. So who was Pharaoh? We have three options. I think. You can think anyone you want, and we can still be friends. I have friends, by the way, in the other camps. But second, Amenhotep was who I think is Pharaoh of the Exodus, and I think the Exodus date was 1447 or one of these other two. And the reason why I think this is because Amenhotep, of these three candidates, is the only one who himself was not a firstborn. Thutmose was a firstborn, Ramses was a firstborn, but Amenhotep's older brother died before him. That's why he became the king. And so I wonder, how could the Pharaoh on the throne, if he was a firstborn, have survived the 10th plague? Because it says that all the firstborns in Egypt, the animals, slaves, all the way up to the throne, were dead. So I think the Pharaoh would have also died, unless God in some way, gave a dispensation for Pharaoh, which it's possible. So I think Amenhotep is the Pharaoh for many reasons, but this is probably one of the primary ones, that he himself was a firstborn, and his firstborn son also died, and he fits the time, and he fits everything else about Egypt except the Red Sea, which I think is maybe he didn't die in the Red Sea. So this is how it would look in the Bible chronology. So if you're looking at my understanding, I'm not saying you have to believe it. I'm just saying this is my understanding. I think they came into Egypt in the second intermediate period, the time of Joseph, when there were horses and chariots in Egypt. Israel died about Jacob died about 1660. Joseph dies about 1589. Levi is still alive when Amos, remember Amos is here, the first one, when he took over and pushed the Hyksos out. We talked about him last night. I think Levi was still alive and died during his reign. And when all of them were dead, which is what Exodus 1 says, when all the patriarchs, all that generation had died, a new king arose who did not know Joseph, did not know the family, didn't have a relationship with them, and he put them into slavery. Moses was born here in the first Tutmos, somewhere in this time here. He was born in 1267 and was adopted in 1515, right towards the end of Tutmos' reign. Ellen White says he was adopted by the man who condemned him, so that would fit, barely, but it would fit. Also, Hatshepsut would have been maybe the princess who found him, and maybe that explains why she was able to hold on to the throne even though she didn't have a son of her own. Moses kills an Egyptian, and Hatshepsut loses her throne shortly after. I think there's actually a little tighter number than this chronology right here. I think it puts a little bit, should go back a little bit more than that, but something like that. And then Thutmose is the one who rules after that, but he dies before. And so when the Bible says that Pharaoh died, who the process of time at the end of chapter 2, I think that's Thutmose, and I think Amenhotep becomes king, and that's when Moses is sent back a few years after. So that's what I think happened. So I think the Pharaoh of the oppression, who put him into slavery, was Amenhotep. It's almost uncontested. That's Exodus 1:8-11. The Pharaoh of the infanticide, Exodus 1:22, you shall cast them into the river, is the first Thutmose. I think the Pharaoh who sought to kill Moses, the king who died at the end of chapter 2, was the third Thutmose. I suspect, I postulate, the reason why Thutmose had so many campaigns into the Levant as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt was to find Moses. Moses was a mighty general. According to Josephus, according to even Stephen in Acts chapter 7, Moses was mighty in word and deed. I think he was a general, and I think Thutmose was worried he's going to get an army of Hyksos and come right back in, and so he kept going over and over. I mean, how many times do you have to defeat an army before there's nobody else to defeat? And he would go there every year anyway, and he never did find Moses because Moses was in Midian and not in the Levant. It also says in Exodus 4:19, now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. So all of those at that time are dead. I think the Pharaoh of the Exodus who said, I do not know the Lord, I won't obey him, I don't recognize his authority, I think that's Amenhotep. It's not an atheistic statement, by the way. It's a statement is I don't recognize Yahweh, I don't recognize him as God. He's not my God. I know who he is, but I don't recognize his authority, so I'm not going to obey him. And that's what I think he's saying here. It's not atheistic. It's more of anti-theist. It's more of rebellious against the authority of God. The reason why I think they didn't kill Moses is because of dynasties. Thutmose I, who I think is the Pharaoh of the infanticide, had many children. One of them was Thutmose II. One of them was Hatshepsut. These are brother and sister. Unfortunately, kind of an icky situation. They had a daughter named Neferure. I think Hatshepsut was the mother who found Moses. I think then Thutmose had another wife named Iset or Isis, and they had a son named Thutmose III, and that's where he came from, and Amenhotep. So I think what this is following, Hatshepsut's line, you can't see it here, but if I had more time, I would show you the whole 18th dynasty line, and I would show you that 4 of those kings were young when they became king, and they had a mother rule for them. And the women in the early 18th dynasty were very, very powerful. The line of powerful women, Tetisheri, the wife of second Enreta, who died in a great Hyksos battle. We talked about that last night, the prince from the south. Ahotep, Amos Nefertari, the mother of the first Amenhotep who ruled for him. Mutnefret, his wife. Hatshepsut, the mother of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut and Neferure. There's a line of women, many of which ruled for these. At least these 4, this one, ruled for princes, and they were very powerful. That powerful line of women, that line of Pharaoh, the house of Pharaoh. And when Thutmose III became king, he said, I'm not from that line of powerful women. I want to disassociate from them, and so therefore I'm going to make the emphasis to be the men. And if you look at all of his inscriptions, it's all Thutmose I, Thutmose I, Thutmose I. So he goes back to Thutmose I, his ancestor, and traces the line through the men. and that's where the line comes from. So when Amenhotep was Pharaoh, he actually he never ever mentioned who his wife was. It's only later on that we find after his death that his son, the fourth topmost, mentioned who his mother was. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know who his mother was. He didn't mention any women at all. They kind of disassociated from women altogether because it was a problem. Hatshepsut was the problem. I think that they went a different direction. So a different dynastic line. So when Moses came back, the dynastic line was completely different, and Moses was no longer in line for the Pharaoh, so he was no longer a threat. And that's why I think when Thutmose died, Moses was a threat. When he died, the last person who wanted to kill Moses was dead, and Amenhotep then became king. That's my theory based on the dynastic lines. All right, the last thing, Pharaoh as Golden Horus. Why did I call this Golden Horus? It's because gold is considered the skin of the gods. This is going to become very, very important when we talk about the sanctuary in a few nights from now. But gold was considered the skin of the gods, and Horus was considered the living god. When the king died, he became the new Osiris, and his son became king and became the living Horus. That meant he was actually a god. When Pharaoh, whoever the Pharaoh of the Exodus was, whether it was Amenhotep or Thutmose or Ramses, whoever the Pharaoh was, when he became Pharaoh, he became a living god. And this became very, very important when Moses came with the battle of the gods, which we're going to do tomorrow night, the plagues, because Pharaoh considered himself to be a god. The Golden Horus shows who Pharaoh thought he was, and it ends up being a big problem. Why did Pharaoh harden his heart is a question that's asked often before we get to questions. And I think if you studied the Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson this last week, it mentioned it in there. And I mentioned this as well. Spurgeon, I think, has the evangelist Spurgeon has probably the best explanation for what hardening the heart means. Sometimes it says Pharaoh hardened it. Sometimes it says God hardened it. So who did the hardening? And the way Spurgeon described it, which is also in the Sabbath School lesson, was that if you take butter and you put it out in the sun, and you take that mud brick, the clay that houses are built out of, two different things happen. It's the same sun beating on it, but butter melts. And what happens to the mud brick or the clay? It hardens, right? But it's the same sun doing both. So the sun, you could say the sun's at fault, because the sun actually does it, but the difference is the substance that the sun is hitting. Moses was raised to be a prince in Egypt. He had the same upbringing as whoever the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. He had the same upbringing as that Pharaoh. But when God's loving appeal touched Moses' heart, his heart softened. When it hit Pharaoh's heart, whoever that Pharaoh was, it hardened. And the reason the difference is because of their hearts. Moses knew he wasn't a god. Moses knew that who God was, and he decided to perfectly surrender his will to God's will, no matter what that meant. And because of that, he humbled and became the meekest man on the face of the earth that ever lived, according to his own admissions, which is interesting. But Pharaoh, on the other hand, thought of himself as the Golden Horus. He thought of himself as a god, and therefore when God came to him and said, "Let my people go," he hardened because his substance of his heart was a proud heart. And this, I think, is the lesson for us, and I want to leave you with this lesson tonight, is that we have the same loving appeal that comes to us. The same God that talked to Moses talks to us in this book, the Holy Bible. And he comes to our hearts, and he asks us to surrender our wills to him. Now, I'm from a very rebellious family. My grandfather was a Norwegian. If you know anything about Norwegians, you know they're very stubborn people. My other grandfather was from England, and you know how hard-headed they are. And so there's a very, very stubborn backgrounds and hard-headed backgrounds are very rebellious. And I've struggled with this a lot. I know who God is, and I know what I want him to do in my life, but how many times do I feel like I've got to be the one in control? And this is something I struggle with, and I'm sure many people struggle with the same thing. It's the same thing Moses and Pharaoh struggled with. And God's loving appeal is reaching out tonight as it reaches out every time we talk about him and asking us to surrender one more time. And so I'm asking you tonight to surrender one more time, to come to God like Moses, surrender your heart, let it soften like butter in a hot sun, which you certainly know about hot suns here in Arizona, and let God reach you and mold you and change you so that his will becomes yours and not your will, so you do what he wants and become who he wants you to be, and then he could mightily use you. God raised Pharaoh up for this purpose, not because God wanted him to be hard, but because God knew who he was, and God needed to teach the Hebrews and the Egyptians a very important lesson, a lesson we're going to talk about tomorrow night. So if you want to know more about the 10 plagues and why God sent 10 plagues, come back tomorrow night at 6:30 here. Thank you very much. Oh, and before we leave, If you want to know the story, somebody asked last night. I didn't put the slide up long enough. I'll leave it up here while we have question and answers. So if you want to know the Land of Ramses, it's a book I wrote, a novel. There it is. If you're interested in reading more about the story in a story form, it's written like a Tom Clancy novel, but there's multiple things happening, and then eventually, about the time you get to the plagues, it kind of all weaves together into one story. And it's a historical mystery novel. It was kind of fun to write. That is accurate to the Bible, doesn't change the Bible, doesn't change archaeology, and kind of runs through there. And you can guess after tonight who the Pharaoh of the Exodus is in that story. Okay. Any questions? Yes. Yeah.
Hello, hello. A few. One, as you were listing all the kings and
Yes.
the mummies and everything, how do you know their names? They don't have plates on.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, oftentimes they'll have labels. Actually, the mummified wraps will be
do.
labeled. And so they actually did put their names in there. A lot of the scarabs will have their names on it, so they're buried with different scarabs and things that will have their names on it. They're usually their throne name, which is useful because it was just a birth name. It'd be this, you couldn't tell which Tutmos we're looking at or which Ramses, but because it has a throne name, then you know who it is.
Oh.
Yeah, and it seems like the priests, the reburial took place in the late period. And it seems like the priests at that time took care to mostly label those mummies. That's how we know. Although, that said, there is some controversy, though. If you read scholarship, there is some controversy about the identification of some of the mummies because of that very, very good question, very insightful question.
Okay, and along the same, Moses was put in a basket or an ark
Yes.
to save him.
Yes.
He had a brother that was older than him.
Yes.
What happened? I mean, how did Aaron get through this?
So
Did
yeah.
the decree happen after
Yeah,
Aaron?
it
was
seems
born?
like it happened afterward because Aaron was the older brother, right? He was the older brother, and so probably he was already working in the fields already with the men doing the work of the men because from a very young age they were already out working. Miriam, it appears, was a little bit younger, and so she was still with the kids playing nearby.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why.
And then my last question:
Okay.
the mother, the Pharaoh mother, or the Egyptian
Yeah.
mother of Moses, and how do you pronounce it? It's
Hatshepsut.
Hatshep.
Hatshepsut. Or Hatshepsut, if you want
Now
to.
she was a king for a while.
Yes, about 22 years, something like that.
Okay. During that time, I mean, you don't hear about her anymore when Pharaoh's around.
No,
And-
she died right.
She
Right
died-
about that time. Yeah, right about the time Moses killed the Egyptians. Shortly after that, she died. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was.
And in
wondering.
fact, Tutmos, her son, the third Tutmos, didn't chisel her name. Her name got chiseled out later on, but it got chiseled out by Amenhotep, probably, not Tutmos. It had nothing to do with being angry. In fact, in year 20 of his solar reign, the third Tutmos actually put a stele where he actually honored his stepmother. So her ruling for him was not seen as usurping the throne. It was very, very normal. Like I said, 3 other kings in that same dynasty line had mothers rule for them. One of them, Amos Nefertari for Amenhotep I, actually, she ruled his entire reign. And so it was very usual. It wasn't an unusual thing that she did. Unfortunately, the early people who wrote about this in the early 1900s, back before women were maybe given their fair due in society, were very, very negative about Hatshepsut and concocted this whole thing about how there's this big rivalry and how Tutmos really hated his stepmother and she was out of place. She overstepped her boundaries. Now it looks like she didn't overstep anything. She was a very powerful woman. She was the god's wife of Ammon, the most powerful woman in ancient Egypt before she became queen. And then when she became queen, she was powerful. And then she became king, and she had many supporters. In fact, some of her supporters continued on to be supporters of Tutmos III when she died. So the rivalry that you read about sometimes in literature doesn't appear to have been the case at all from the archaeological record, at least. Yeah. Yes.
With the slide that showed the title of your book,
Yes.
yeah, put that
It's back. Can you put it back on the screen? Do you mind? Yeah.
there. That second, the letter after the M, is that supposed to be an A?
Yeah. So this is it's supposed to be an E actually when you're looking it up. So Ramesses is going to be an E, and if you type in the title of the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's going to be E. It's purposely obscured here for a reason, but you're going to have to read the book to find out what the reason is. But
Okay.
But it's spelled with E. Yeah. It's with E.
And also, Aaron was only 3 years older than Moses, so would he
yeah.
have been
It
working
wasn't much older. It wasn't much older.
at that age?
Yeah. They had the young ones out there early
Hmm.
doing stuff. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Yep. Yeah, he's only 3 years older. According to Exodus 7, I think is it 7:7? I think it says that the age of Moses and Aaron. Yeah. Thank you.
Did they ever do any archaeology findings on the Red Sea to any evidence of the armies?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about the route of the Exodus in a couple nights. I think that's going to be Wednesday night. We'll talk about that. So yeah, we'll talk about some of that.
So I saw his name up on the list, and he must be separated later. But King Tut's very famous, Tutankhamun.
Yes.
Where did he was much later?
Yeah, he's
or
much
where-
later. Let's see if I can go back there real quick. Let me see if I can find that a list of the names. I'm going to look down here at the screen as I flip back really quickly. Hopefully I'm not there. Almost there. Okay, it's quite a bit back. Okay, we're getting close to it. There. Okay, so if you're looking at this screen here, so here is Thutmose 1, Thutmose 2, Hatshepsut, Thutmose 3, Amenhotep 2. We're talking about them. Here's Thutmose 4, the dream stele. And then his son, Amenhotep 3, was a great builder. In fact, the statue, the Colossi of Memnon that we talk about, maybe you've heard of them, that's Amenhotep 3. Akhenaten is the heretic king, and then Tutankhamun is here. He's way down here. He only ruled for a very short time. He was a young king. He didn't rule very long. He's famous only because of the tomb. Otherwise, he was almost a nothing king. He didn't do a whole lot. It is possible that someone has speculated. I don't want to suggest anything, but someone has speculated based on the injuries of the mummy. The problem with Tutankhamun's mummy was just, Howard Carter, bless his heart. It's a southern saying, isn't it? Bless your heart. I don't know if you guys say that over here, but in Tennessee they say that. Bless your heart. He tried very hard, but they destroyed that mummy. So it's really difficult now as a doctor to look at that mummy. But one doctor who knows a little bit about wounds in Africa looked at it and says he thinks that there's actually evidence that Tutankhamun died with a hippopotamus wound, which means that probably in the hippopotamus ritual, Thutmose may have slipped. Maybe the hippopotamus. Maybe he got the better of, maybe the hippopotamus won that day and the king died that day. And so good for the hippopotamus. But maybe that's how Tutankhamun died. It's possible. So that's one of the theories. I'm kind of charmed by it. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's charmed by it. Served them right. Yes. It's a hippopotamus lover in the audience. It served them right. That's right. Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
So this is just a promo for you. I looked it up, your book, and we can order it and get it here by Wednesday so you can sign it.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yes, I'd be happy
Anyway,
to sign
off
it.
of Amazon. So I won't tell you the price. You have to look it up yourself.
Praise God
Both
for Amazon.
paperback and hardback.
Yeah, here, mine.
I wrote. I wrote the book for my non-Christian friends. I wanted them, colleagues, I want them to understand the story of the Exodus from a perspective, the Egyptian perspective. We hear about the Hebrew perspective all the time, and the Hebrews are in there, obviously, and Moses' story is in there. That's the main story. But the Egyptians were doing something at the time, and I wanted to get what their perspective was as these things were happening. And so the book is written a lot from the Egyptian perspective. So it's kind of a fun new way of maybe looking at the story. But it's written for adults, by the way, not for kids. I read it to my daughters when they were young, and I skipped certain parts because you just have to skip certain parts in the ancient Egypt. It's not all for the young audience, just to give you a fair warning. Anything else? All right, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Tomorrow, the plagues.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. So interesting to see not the skeleton, but the flesh put on, see a better picture of history and how God has moved. It's just amazing. Thank you. Before we close, we just bow one more time for prayer. Father, thank you so much for shining down. Please touch each one of our hearts. Help us to be more like butter and less like clay. Thank you so much. We pray in Jesus' name.